Hello, this is John Pavlik from Rutgers, the State University of New Jersey.
And this is John Kellogg from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee.
And we'll be presenting today our research on when radio was new, considering the case of early Austrian radio theater. So in the 21st century, this global crisis in democracy and its interconnection with the arts has an important historical precedent in the early 20th century Austria, when the rise of fascism in that country and in the 1930s intersected with the then new art form of radio theater. Our paper examines this political crisis and the arts confluence through the lens of two early radio plays produced for and broadcast on early Austrian radio. Radio served as the first electronic communication platform for the creative industry to widely engage the public. Broadcasting historian Wolfgang Penzold notes that the pioneers of Austrian radio drew on the work of art critic Rudolf Arnheim as they aimed to create, quote, broadcasting as audio art. How did external cultural forces, political forces shape early Austrian radio programming? Some fascinating ways. Austrian radio broadcasting is the Austrian national public service broadcaster, and its first broadcast was on the 1st of October, 1924. Austrian radio was among the first broadcasters worldwide. The early audience for Austrian radio was about 10,000 listeners tuning in from the first transmissions in 1924, but it grew quickly so that by 1926, there were some 220,000 radio listeners in Austria. Austrian radio held much promise, including the extensive use of the public airwaves for public education. And Austrian radio in 1924 introduced the radio play. Important to this is the secondariness of radio. Theorists have argued that a unique quality of radio as a medium for storytelling is its invisible soundstage, as well as the secondariness of radio, meaning the audio nature of the medium allows the audience to engage in other activity while still listening. Pavlik has argued that by combining the use of multiple audio capacities of radio, artists of the 1920s and 30s were able to create a new art form on that medium, the radio play or radio theater storytelling. Circumstances were changing, though, by the 1930s. Fascism was on the rise in Austria, and Nazi Germany's influence was growing. The year 1933 marked the end of the First Austrian Republic. It was replaced by the fascist federal state of Austria under the Fatherland Front. Nazi Germany also began transmitting radio propaganda into Austria. Then there was the boycott of 1933 to 38. This boycott in Austria and Germany was of Jewish businesses, artists, and performers. Austrian radio became part of the German radio network at this time, and Jewish contributions to Austrian radio soon ended, and many of those individuals were forced to leave the country or were victims of the Holocaust. The German elections of March 1933 brought the Nazi Party into office, and it put increasing pressure on Austria, leading to heightened nationalism and pointing the country on a path toward fascism and anti-Semitism. Combined, these forces shaped once independent Austrian radio and began to influence its programming in both subtle and not so subtle fashion.
The early radio plays. Many of the radio plays on early Austrian radio were adaptations of classic works by various international playwrights. Austrian radio also commissioned original radio narrative programs. Among the authors it commissioned was an Austrian author, Fritz Binder, whose various works were broadcast on Austrian radio as early as 1930. Hans Nüchtern, the head of Austrian radio's literature department, also wrote several programs. Our thesis is that by 1933, Austrian radio narrative programming, including radio theater, had begun to shift toward the right or conservative nationalistic direction. And our methodology involves a trove of some 4,700 Austrian radio program scripts, which were recently recovered and placed in the Austrian radio archives in Vienna. The scripts were used to produce the actual program's broadcast. To test the thesis of this paper, we critically examined two scripts from the above-mentioned trove. The first and oldest play we examine is among the first narrative productions produced for and aired on Austrian radio in 1924. The second script we study is among the first radio narrative programs produced and aired in 1933. Our approach in this paper is that of a case study, that of early Austrian radio during a period of increasingly political crisis. we employ a critical reading of the two radio plays. The first play we examine is a work of fiction titled Der böse Geist Lumpacivagabundus, Zauberpose mit Gesang in 3 Aufzügen, or The Evil Spirit Lumpacivagabundus, a magical farce with singing in 3 acts. It is a play Austrian actor and playwright Johann Nestroy wrote for the theater in 1833, produced and aired on Austrian radio in 1924. The second play we examine is an historical production titled Vaterländische Gedenkstunde, die Schlacht bei Aspern, or Patriotic Hour of Commemoration, the Battle of Aspern. The play aired on Austrian radio in 1933, which commissioned the script from Austrian Fritz Binder. In our textual analysis, we examine key elements of the two plays in terms of their themes, narrative structure, tone, use of metaphors, and other linguistic elements. These features are especially reflected in characteristics of dialogue, as well as their use of music or other sound effects unique to the audio medium of radio. Nestroy's The Evil Spirit Lumpacivagabundus. As Nestroy's play was originally written for the stage, the radio script reflects the various ways his plays was adapted for radio presentation. In the first act, first scene, we find typical of a radio script. It uses some narration to set the stage and dialogue to advance the story and develop the characters and their relationships and highlight the humorous nature of the farce. Some language was updated and simplified for radio. Typical changes include the original script being adapted to the radio in 20th century. Old-fashioned language, for instance, is updated. Etc. has been changed to und so weiter. Many scenes feature minor changes without changing the basic narrative. Typical linguistic change involved replacing obsolete 19th century language with contemporary 20th century words or phrases, such as in Act 2, Scene 16, Dackeln becomes Pinseln. In Act 2, Scene 8, dialect German was changed to Standard German, such as Gehzornigen becomes Jezornigen. Audio gags were also included. Illustrating the adaptation of the stage play to the radio theater, sound effects or background chatter are indicated in parentheses and underlined. For example, tumult and murmeln, mumbling. Likewise, various audio gags were added. In some cases, visual elements were removed or changed to audio form. In one case, a visual gag was removed. There is also the addition of vocatives, key to a radio adaptation so the listener understands which character is speaking to whom. Some scenes in the radio script include director's notes, such as in Act 3, Scene 15, where Musik and Donner are added. In Scene 8, a director's note refers to Radiostrophe, which we translate to as radio stanza. In some cases, original stage directions are changed to spoken lines, as in Scene 7 of Act 3. It is worth noting that throughout the play, the multiculturalism of Old Austria is prominent. For instance, in Act 2, Scene 23, there is a joke on the terms Italienisch and Walisch, which is retained from the original, although it's slightly rewritten.
And there are some more substantive changes as well. 8 scenes in the radio play were significantly changed beyond matters such as linguistic updates. There were structural changes to the Hörspiel or radio play. In Act 1, Scene 18 was renumbered to number 19. Some scenes were deleted, including in Act 2, Scenes 1 and 2 were deleted in the radio play. Here we see a monument to the battle in the shape of a lion in the church cemetery, and this plays a part in the second radio play we examine. Binder's Battle of Aspern. In contrast to the radio script for Nestroy's play, an examination of the script for Binder's Battle of Aspern reveals that the production lacks an explicit act and scene structure. Instead, the script is written simply as a linear narrative with page numbered sequentially to 13. The script features frequent nationalistic or patriotic elements, employing a combination of narration, dialogue, and patriotic song to advance the story. It employs excerpts from multiple sources to complete the narrative in the radio play. Setting the stage, at the outset on page 2, the script features spoken narration to set the stage. Napoleon is a skilled warrior who needs to be stood up to. 1809, the script declares, the great Corsican demonic genius of war flashes threateningly once again over Austria. Napoleon is also referred to as an excited lion, readying himself to pounce and scratch Austria off the map. The script describes a monument to the battle in the shape of a lion in the church cemetery, sculpture made by Anton Dominic Fenkorn. And there's praise for the Archduke. Page 2 of the script features spoken narration praising Archduke Charles, the brother of Emperor Francis II. On page 4, the narration speaks of the untiring spirit of Vienna and how it is the center of the empire. This emphasizes the nation-building theme of the play.
The play quotes Theodor Körner, who wrote patriotic works which were pro-German, and Ignaz Franz Castelli, who wrote Kriegslied für die österreichische Armee, war anthem for the Austrian army. These lines featured, "Long live Charles, the German hero, for whom the new laurel blossoms and flourishes." Making sacrifices. The script features narration that not just in Vienna, but in the whole empire, there was shown a willingness to make sacrifices, Opferfreudigkeit, and the courage to do battle, Kampfesmut. In both the high and low classes, the rich and poor, the young and old, everyone rallied to the flag. The script quotes a passage from Emil Ertel's novel, The People of the Blue Cuckoo House. The expert continues through the end of paragraph 2 on page 11 and corresponds to pages 377 through 392 in the 1911 edition of the book. Collin's Soldier Song. Austrian dramatist Heinrich Joseph von Collin's Soldier Song, Österreich über alles, wenn es nur will, with music by Josef Weigel. This was also featured in the radio program. If it only dares, Austria is above all else. Soldiers now ring out joyously, it dares, up Austria. The play concludes with the poem Auf dem Schlachtfelde von Aspern by Theodor Körner, on the battlefield of Aspern. Highlighting Austria's connection to Germany, it is of note that this poem refers to the Vaterland and Deutschland.
So to summarize the findings, our textual analysis indicates the 1924 radio play focused thematically and largely on narrative and storytelling, offering a culturally nuanced farce on Austrian life. The 1924 radio play stayed largely true to the original Nestroy version, which is in the tradition of a morality play. It features wordplay, farce, and an implied social critique and orchestral musical accompaniment. It brings the play to the radio theater. The play maintained the original narrative structure of 3 acts with multiple scenes in each. Adaptations of the play, as originally written, include linguistic modifications, especially updates, new lines of dialogue, and narration to replace visual elements in the stage play, and the director notes for radio production. The second program, Binders, although still features some quality narrative elements of the emerging new medium, such as the extensive use of song, reflects a shift toward a more nationalistic and patriotic theme. There's a reduced emphasis on theatrical structure and storytelling elements with an increasing reliance on narration rather than character development and dialogue. Binder's play depicts the Battle of Aspern-Essling, which was a major battle in the War of the Fifth Coalition. It was a tactical victory for the Austrians, but ultimately it was not decisive as Napoleon crushed them in the next battle, the Battle of Wagram. Napoleon won the war, which resulted in a treaty which was harsh on Austria. It seems strange to celebrate such a victory when the war was lost a few weeks later, unless the objective is to promote nationalism via the radio play.
In comparison to Nüchtern's Hörspiel, Binder's 1933 Querschnitt was clearly more nationalistic, patriotic, pro-Austrian in subject matter. This is as hypothesized, that there was a significant shift towards a more nationalistic message between the 1924 Nüchtern radio production and the 1933 Binder radio production. Although we cannot state definitely that this shift is directly attributable to the rise of fascism and Nazism in Austria in 1933, the circumstantial evidence, that is, the timing, is compelling. Our concluding reflections. This paper has examined an early electronic audio art form, that of radio theater. In particular, We have studied 1920s and 1930s Austrian radio and its intersection with the rise of fascism and Nazism in Austria during this period. Three clear lessons emerge from this analysis. First, during the First Austrian Republic, independent Austrian radio contributed to the development of innovative programming on the then nascent medium of electronic public communication. This innovation includes the production of radio theater. Among the earliest plays was a cultural farce providing a satirical portrait of Austrian country life. Second, with the rise of fascism and Nazism in Germany and Austria, by 1933, theatrical programming had begun to take a markedly more nationalistic tone. This is evident in the form of the 1933 radio play studied here, Fritz Binder's Querschnitt, recalling the Austrian battle with Emperor Napoleon. The play was more nationalistic, patriotic, pro-Austrian in subject matter, even offering a bit of revisionist history that portrays the battle with Napoleon as patriotic Austrian heroism and frequently connecting it culturally with Germany.
So finally, the rise of fascism and Nazism led to profoundly damaging effects on Jewish life in Austria, including their diminishment and ultimate exclusion from the radio arts on Austria. Jewish artists who were once contributors to the radio arts were even exiled and many ultimately murdered in the Holocaust. The findings of this investigation suggest several implications for the study of contemporary media arts, including not only radio, but also digital formats such as podcasting or beyond. Investigators might examine the extent to which podcasts or other media narrative art forms are increasingly reframing historical narratives in more nationalistic tones or themes. Research might also examine the extent to which marginalized groups are being increasingly excluded from these media arts.
Limitations of this study. This study compares two forms of audio narrative programming, one a fictional play and one a non-fictional cross-section. This study did not have access to the actual audio of this historical radio production. Much is lost to us. We cannot analyze the quality of acting, their interpretation of these scripts, the production values, music, creative use of invisible soundstage. The second, a Querschnitt, contains dialogue, but we do not know that dialogue was dramatized or presented to the listener. Although music was an important element of these productions, we lack the scores, so we cannot adequately interpret the role of music.
So we'd also like to express our thanks to DocuFunk, the Austrian Radio Archives, especially Wolfgang Harranth, director, and staff Christoph Humner and Marion Heinsworth.